Hello, I'm Sensei Alice Kakuyo. I'd like to welcome you to this evening's Dharma Sunday, where we take canonical Buddhist teachings and tie them with real-world events. These teachings are offered free of charge, but if you'd like to make a contribution, information for PayPal and CashApp are in the description for this talk. And if you want to do a deep dive into Buddhist training, check out my book, Perfectly Ordinary Buddhist Teachings for Everyday Life. There's a link to a free sample chapter of the book, also in the description for this talk. Now, the title of this evening's chat is Seaspiracy and the Buddhist Teachings on Eating Meat. So, Seaspiracy is a Netflix documentary that came out a couple weeks ago to a lot of criticism and a lot of applause. It talks about the international fishing market, the harm that's being caused to our oceans and the climate because of fishing, and they then give some ideas on what we should do to deal with that. So what I'll do is I'll read two articles, one in favor of the documentary, one opposed to it, and then I'll discuss what Buddhism teaches about eating meat, because some people sometimes are surprised by that. Now, the first article comes from Greenpeace. You can read it yourself at greenpeace.org. The title is Seaspiracy. The movie was chilling, but what can I do now? It's written by Ellie Hooper, came out April 1st, 2021, and Ellie writes, the Netflix documentary Seaspiracy hit screens last week, taking a deep dive into what's causing the rapidly declining state of the ocean. Directed by British filmmaker Ali Tabrizi, the film follows his journey as he discovers the true cost commercial fishing is having on the sea, what we stand to lose if we continue to allow this industry to run rampant across our blue planet. After watching everything from whale hunts to industrial-scale bottom trawling, shark finning to lice-infested fish farms, Tabrizi concludes, spoiler alert, that the oceans are in big trouble, and the best way for him to be active on this issue is to avoid eating seafood. With global fishing supply chains so convoluted and complex, he concludes there's no such thing as sustainable seafood and vows to ditch the fish for good. I've seen Seaspiracy. Now do I need to go fish free to save the ocean? The film has already caused some controversy, not a bad thing, but like its Cowspiracy counterpart, unfortunately, some of the information it contains has also been questioned. Seaspiracy does, however, have some important points, and there is no doubt that the oceans are in big trouble. I'm not going to do a full fact check of Seaspiracy, but I do want to challenge the idea that the only thing you can do is stop eating fish. In the global north, where our access to a variety of different food types is greater, we should all be eating less animal products. It's better for the planet, and it's better for us too. But the problem with claiming that it's the best thing you can do, or the only route to save the ocean, is that it's just not enough for some of us to change our diets. We need big systemic change, and we need it quickly. Also, many communities around the globe, and indeed here in, I don't know how to pronounce that, Aotearoa, depend upon fishing to survive. Not everyone can afford to avoid seafood, and many of these communities don't take more from the sea than they need. A blanket ban on eating fish would unfairly disadvantage these communities. It is industrialized fishing that's the true evil here, not traditional harvesters taking what they need to feed their family. Many people in the global south are amongst the most vulnerable in the world, fighting multiple threats, including climate change and overfishing. Both catastrophes have been largely caused by the privileged global north. Going fish-free is great if you can, but our true power lies is when we work together. If we want to change things at the speed we need to, we must put pressure on global governments to change the way we treat the ocean. The ocean doesn't have time to wait for every individual to go vegan. Global solutions to problems raised by Seaspiracy. Solving a problem as large as this is not simple, but there are solutions backed up by scientists who have been waving red flags for years. What we need to get these solutions implemented is people power. Everyday people getting together and creating pressure on their government to protect the ocean for us all. This is how we've made change happen many times before, including kicking oil and gas giants out of New Zealand, stopping shark finning, and getting more protections for Maui dolphins. Protecting key areas of the sea from commercial fishing areas that are known migratory pathways, biodiversity hotspots, and spawning grounds is one of the major solutions scientists have put forward to save the ocean from collapse. A global ocean treaty at the UN would give us the ability to protect 30% of the world's ocean from fishing and other threats, and allow it to start recovering. The good news is that we know recovery is possible, and that it could happen within a few decades if we take action now. Greenpeace has been campaigning for a global ocean treaty for years, and it is vital that we get the strongest version of it across the line. Okay, then there's some advertisements. It starts local. In Aotearoa and around the world, the commercial fishing industry is doing widespread damage to the ocean through techniques like bottom trawling that destroy habitats, kill non-target species, and take too many fish for populations to rebuild. As Seaspiracy noted, that is having a devastating effect on the functioning of the ocean, our biggest carbon sink, and home to an estimated 80% of life on this planet. We cannot fight the twin crises in biodiversity and climate if we don't protect the ocean, take less from it, and stop damaging its ability to sequester carbon. So we must take the commercial fishing industry to task and force governments to stop letting them off the hook for the damage they do. Our survival and the survival of everything else on this planet depends on a healthy ocean. If the ocean dies, we die too. In Aotearoa, we've known for years that big fishing companies have too much influence over our government and ocean management decisions, and we know the way we fish needs to change. We know that the commercial fishing industry lobbies the government relentlessly and has successfully watered down ocean protection measures for decades. For those that protect seabirds to those designed to protect coral, we suspect that it's their influence preventing New Zealand from committing to a strong global ocean treaty at the UN. Take on the most destructive forms of fishing. Bottom trawling, the most devastating form of fishing there is, needs to be banned. Where corals grow and provide vital habitats for fish in the very basis of the oceanic food chain. When bottom trawlers target seamounts where these corals are found, they bulldoze everything. Their giant nets capture everything in the area, from target to non-target species, ancient corals to sharks. Worse still is that the nature of the trawling destroys the habitat, flattening it, meaning it can no longer support life and won't for decades to come. In Seaspiracy, they quote the stat that 3.9 billion acres of seafloor is destroyed by bottom trawling every year, compared to 25 billion on land. The impacts of this on biodiversity are obvious, but just last month it was revealed that bottom trawling also releases more carbon emissions than global aviation. This form of fishing is a double whammy for the environment, wiping out species and habitats and disturbing the world's largest carbon sink on which life on Earth depends. Hold the fishing industry to account. The commercial fishing industry needs to be held accountable for what they do out at sea. A key component of that is getting more transparency around it. There are already rules for fishers about how to protect the ocean, but without the independent checks, there's no way to ensure they are being followed. Again and again, we are shown that when we rely on commercial fishing to self-report the impacts of their fishing, they don't tell the whole truth. To ensure they do, and to make sure commercial fishing can't stay out of sight and out of mind, we need cameras on all commercial fishing vessels and the fish accessible to more than just the industry. Tackle plastic fishing waste. The plastic-free movement has exploded in the past 5 years, bringing with it millions of individuals who vow to avoid plastic bottles, ban the bag, and ditch the plastic packaging. Eliminating the single-use plastic is important if we want to stem the tide entering the ocean. But there's one industry that's still getting off the hook, and they're a major contributor. Ghost fishing gear, lines, and the like that are lost or discarded at sea by commercial fishing is everywhere. It's estimated fishing waste makes up a whopping 46% of what's in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. This stuff is all the more deadly to ocean life because it was always designed to kill, and when it's lost at sea, it goes on killing for years after becoming separated from its original owner. Many whales, dolphins, turtles, and fish get caught up in these nets and perish or ingest them and die. It's high time commercial fishing was held to account for their role in plastics crisis. Don't just sign petitions. Taking action is what Greenpeace is all about. For 50 years, we've been standing up for the ocean and all life on this earth. Our independence matters. That's an advertisement. Okay, so that's Greenpeace. As you can see, they are primarily for the article, or not the article, the documentary and what they had to say. However, they don't take it as far as the documentary does. They say that we shouldn't stop eating fish. We should just be more careful, more sustainable about it. Take the industrial fishing industry to task and, force them to quote unquote do fishing right in an industrial sense. So I'm going to read one more article, which is very much against the documentary. And then I'm going to talk about what the Buddha said about eating fish. One second. Okay, and this comes from the National Fisheries Institute. All right, so you can't say I haven't shown you both sides of the argument. Seaspiracy, recognizable propaganda. This kit was written by NFI Media, so probably a marketing piece / article, March 24th, 2021. It's fairly short, but it says, the concern with some slickly produced propaganda pieces masquerading as documentaries is that audiences will not recognize the film's true agenda. Despite the artistic aerial shots, exciting, albeit hyperbolic, cloak and dagger scenes, and stirring action movie-like soundtrack, there is little concern Seaspiracy will be mistaken for anything but a vegan indoctrination movie. The film begins by suggesting without evidence that fisheries bycatch is an issue governments have practically given up on enforcing. Then touts a narrative that an internationally recognized seafood label is a complete fabrication. All this before whipsawing viewers from the argument that getting rid of plastic straws was once considered a pollution fix, but that now the only real solution is getting rid of the entire commercial fishing sector. Before long, the producers describe a fishing vessel with the caveat that what it really is a death machine. They then dive headlong into an embrace of the idea that the oceans will be empty by 2048, which is based on a completely debunked 2006 statistic. Refuted by none other than the author of the original study, the 2048 statistic was put to rest by a follow-up report in the journal Science released in 2009 under the title New Hope for Fisheries. Gravitating towards the popular call to ban fishing in 30% of the oceans by 2030, this was referenced in the Greenpeace article, the film turns to an author who owns a vegan food company, an animal rescue sanctuary, and is also apparently a dentist. His endorsement of the 30 by 30 slogan policy is based on his calculation that, in reality, less than 1% of our oceans are being regulated. This is, of course, not only inaccurate, it's nonsensical. But it doesn't end there. He goes on to compare choosing fish based on some eco-labels to essentially saying it's more sustainable to shoot a polar bear than shooting a panda. During a segment on illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing in Africa, director Ali Tabrizi claims in the United States, up to one in every three wild-caught fish imported have been caught illegally and therefore sold illegally, stolen often from countries in most need. The methodology behind this wildly inflated statistic has been picked apart in the very journal where it appears. Methods to estimate IUU are not credible. And then there's a link. Meanwhile, papers using the same approach have been retracted. While IUU is a serious issue and unacceptable at any level, Tabrizi's calculated film making seems to conflate overestimated IUU numbers with U.S. seafood imports from Africa. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reports less than 2% of U.S. seafood imports come from Africa. Before setting their sights on aquaculture, the filmmakers can't help but slip in a vegan dog whistle in describing fishing boats. They say, it became clear these vessels were more like floating slaughterhouses. Adeptly leading viewers down the primrose path, fish farming is lauded as a potential method that could provide some kind of solution before it is eviscerated with out-of-date tropes like the lie that farmed salmon is dyed pink. The film later digs up another classic in complaining about PCBs in fish, but never ironically mentions that Harvard University research finds seafood broadly, but not farmed salmon makes up only 9% of the PCBs in the average American diet, while products like vegetables make up 20%. Yes, vegetables. As the film begins its expected arch into unabashed vegan rhetoric about fish feeling pain and how animals use democratic decision-making, it logs a chapter about labor abuses in the seafood space. This is a serious and concerning topic that the filmmakers bring nothing new to. While their interviews with silhouetted victims are heartbreaking, what is really on display here is, as the New York Times put it, a cheap imitation of a hard-hitting investigative journalism. In the end, the film sputters to a close with what is essentially a predictable commercial for highly processed, plant-based alternative products. So that, again, came from the National Fisheries Institute. No surprise, they're not a fan of the Seaspiracy documentary. It's on Netflix. Highly encourage all of you to watch it yourself, make up your own mind. And I wanted to discuss this for a couple of reasons. One, this is a very hot topic, climate change, our oceans and what's going to happen to them. But it's also a very common discussion in Buddhist groups and social media. And are Buddhists allowed to eat meat? Should we eat meat? And this is one of those arguments, one of those debates that has been going on literally from the time of the Buddha. So at least 2,600 years. I'm not going to solve this debate tonight, but I will sort of lead you through some of the threads of the discussion in Buddhism. In my own life, as I've said before, I'm plant-based, so I don't eat meat or seafood or anything like that. And the reason is because I was at a Buddhist temple. This is way back at the beginning of my training. And the temple just happened to be right across from a restaurant. And there was a kitchen there because on Wednesdays, they would make meals for all of the students and we would sit and eat and talk, and then we would go train in the meditation hall. So I was running late, which wasn't uncommon. So I grabbed some food on the way, and I forget what it was. I think it was like steak, shrimp, and mashed potatoes, something like that. So I went in the temple and I'm eating my food in the kitchen before practice. And one of the senior students walks in and she says very politely, but very firmly, "You can't eat that here." And I was a little taken aback. I didn't know what she meant. So I asked her why. And she explained that, out of compassion for sentient beings, we as Buddhists, we do our best to not consume meat or animal products. So I didn't want to cause any trouble. I wanted to practice the Dharma, so I took my food outside. I finished it there, and then I came in and I continued with the practice. And I didn't go vegan or vegetarian overnight, but that planted a seed in my head of, well, what am I eating? And what's the food chain, the supply chain? What's the causes that are going into this? What's the karma that's associated with what's on my plate? So then I moved to a plant-based diet, but that wasn't the be-all end-all because there were some problems there. Because I found out that insects and earthworms and vermin, rabbits and whatnot are killed when vegetables are harvested. Bacteria, insects are killed when pesticides are dropped. and Roundup and whatnot ends up in the groundwater. So okay, I'll only eat organic food because that's pesticide free. But then, well, vegetables come from all over the world, and there's all these emissions involved in the process. So, okay, I'll eat organic food that was only grown locally where I lived. And that is very hard to find. And long story short, all of these caveats started to be added on until finally it just felt like I couldn't eat anything. No matter if I eat meat, if I eat vegetables, no matter what kind of vegetables I got or where I sourced them from, there was some suffering involved, right? And I wanted to practice Buddhism. I wanted to be a good student. I wanted to end suffering for all sentient beings. So I went to my teacher and asked him what to do. And he listened to all of my questions and concerns. And finally he said, just do your best. And that's all he said. Just do your best. You're making this too complicated. So that's what I do. I'm plant-based. It's not a perfect solution, but it's the best I can do at this point. And it's interesting because if we look at the teachings of the Buddha, he more or less said the same thing to his students. So people are often surprised to find out the Buddha was not vegan or vegetarian. And there are some reasons for that, which I'll go into. First being that he was a mendicant monk. So he didn't buy food at a grocery store. He didn't grow his own food. He only ate what was offered to him on alms rounds. He also lived in India 2,600 years ago when starvation was just a fact of life. And it's hard for us as Westerners to understand this idea that there could just be no food, right? Even if we go to the grocery store and our favorite type of peanut butter isn't there, there's still some peanut butter there, right? And even if that store doesn't have any of the food we want, a store does. Maybe we have to drive a little farther, maybe we're inconvenienced, but the idea that there could be a crop failure where there's literally no food to eat, we can't fathom that, but that's the world that the Buddha lived in. So out of practicality and also wanting to maintain this good relationship with the lay community that was supporting them, he tried to make it as easy to support him and his monastics as possible, but at the same time hold to their vows. So what he said was that him and his monastics were not allowed to kill animals, and they were not allowed to eat animals that were killed within their sight or hearing, or that were killed specifically for them. So if someone came up to the Buddha and said, I caught this fish for you, he couldn't eat that. But if they simply offered him fish in alms rounds, he was able to accept that, and he did. Because again, he wanted to create a good relationship with the lay community. And if someone who's very poor and probably very hungry is offering you a piece of fish and you say, no, I can't eat that, they're probably not going to respond well, right? And then also you, frankly, as a mendicant monk, only eating what's offered to you, you can't be picky. You can't be choosy in that situation. So long story short, the Buddha and his monastics ate meat, but only under very specific circumstances. And you still see that teaching offered in the Theravada tradition. Now, in the Vajrayana tradition, so this is more Tibetan Buddhism, this is what His Holiness the Dalai Lama practices. They live in Tibet, they live in Nepal, they live in the mountains where vegetables just literally do not grow. I think they grow some barley, but that's about it. They primarily survive on yak and yak milk and yak butter. So even if they wanted to go into a vegan or vegetarian lifestyle, they couldn't just because of where they're located. So in Vajrayana Buddhism, what they do is they do accept meat willingly. However, there's some very rigorous chanting and prostrations that go into it before the meal, doing two things. One, cleansing themselves of any negative karma associated with the consumption of meat, but then also praying for the animal, giving gratitude to them and granting them a happy rebirth, hopefully a human rebirth in their next life so that they're not eaten again. Now, then we get to the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, which is what this Sangha is a part of. This is what I teach you guys. And in Mahayana Buddhism, it's very clear that we need to be vegan or vegetarian. The Buddhist temple where I was at, where the senior student told me, you can't eat that here, referring to my steak and my shrimp, that was a Mahayana Buddhist temple. And if we look at the sutras, we can see that. We see that in the Lakavattara Sutra. We see that in the Shurangama Sutra. We see that in the Nirvana Sutra. In all of these Mahayana texts, the Buddha makes it very clear that, yes, there was a time where I told you you could eat meat under certain circumstances, but now everyone should stop eating animals. And there are various reasons given for that. One being reincarnation. This animal was your mother or your father in a past life, so out of gratitude for what they did for you in that life, you shouldn't eat them. The Bodhisattva vow to save all sentient beings from suffering. We can't save chickens and cows from suffering if we're eating them, things of that nature. But I think it's telling in the Nirvana Sutra, he states very clearly, yes, I told you you could eat meat before, but you can't eat it now. So I think the implication there is that exactly what my teacher told me, is that we just need to do our best. There are going to be times, there are going to be situations, there are going to be people in places where, like I said, the Vajrayana monks, the Tibetan monks that live in the mountains, they have to eat milk, or they have to eat meat, they have to drink milk. There's nothing else there, right? But they're still very deeply realized practitioners. And then there are other individuals like myself, like possibly some of you, who have the choice to not eat meat. And I'm not in the business of telling grown adults what to do, so we all have to make that choice. I personally stopped consuming animals because I have that ability. I don't, I buy food at a grocery store. Right? So I have a choice. Do I want to get protein from a cow, or do I want to get protein from lentils? Which causes the least amount of suffering. There's no such thing as no suffering in samsara. But what causes the least amount of suffering? So I choose to eat the lentils. And it's up to each of you as individuals to choose what you want to do. So that's the Buddha's teaching over 2,600 years on meat consumption, is that ideally, we don't consume meat, but he does allow for the fact that there are some situations where it's unavoidable. And in those situations, we need to try and do it as compassionately as possible. So what does this have to do with Seaspiracy? Well, I think Seaspiracy raises a very good point, which is that industrial fishing is destroying the ocean. And I think I don't think he's wrong, the director, that if we stopped eating meat, that would solve a lot of the problems, because then we're not doing the trawling and the whatnot, and finning sharks and destroying coral reefs, etc. But I think we can go farther than that, because it's not as simple as simply don't eat meat, or don't eat fish, rather. The real issue isn't that we're eating fish, it's why we're eating fish. And the reason we eat fish is desire. Remember, the second noble truth, suffering is caused by desire. The way to end suffering is to end desire. So he states correctly that if we end our desire for fish, then we'll stop trawling the ocean. And that's correct. But we can go farther than that and just look at the industrial fishing industry as a whole. And why has it gotten so big? Why are we destroying the ocean in order to eat shrimp, in order to eat fish, in order to eat, whatever? And it's because we've allowed our desires to get out of control. I'll say it again. We've allowed our desires to get out of control. And that's what's caused all the problems. That's what causes most of our problems. We're not dealing with our desires skillfully. And because our desire for seafood has gotten so great that now we have to have these giant slaughterhouses floating through the ocean to meet it, that's what's leading to all the environmental degradation. So what I would encourage you to do is to really look at your desires, each one individually, and figure out what suffering is caused by this desire. And what am I going to do about it? Not just the desire for fish, but also the desire for fast fashion, cheap clothing, the desire for sex, the desire for easy entertainment via social media. What problems is this desire causing? And is this a desire that I can renounce altogether? Is this a desire that I can work with more skillfully? Or is this a desire that I just have to have, and thus I have to just accept it for what it is? That's the real question. And I think sometimes when we watch these types of documentaries, we get so caught up in, are they right, are they wrong, that we lose track of the real issue, which isn't the fact that people eat fish. That's that's secondary. The primary cause of suffering is why we eat fish. And the primary reason we eat fish is desire for fish. The primary reason we steal is a desire for things that don't belong for us. The primary reason we speak unskillfully is the desire to cause harm to other people through our words. So it's our desires that we need to look at. And it's our desire, no matter what it's geared towards, that we have to work with. And that's what Buddhism is for. When we bow, when we chant, when we meditate, etc., what that does is it creates a mind state where we're not so intoxicated by our desires. And when we're not intoxicated by them, we can see them clearly and we can make better decisions, more skillful decisions, decisions that create less suffering for ourselves and other people. So, like I said, I encourage all of you to watch the documentary. I thought it was pretty well shot. It doesn't get too preachy. It has a good pace. It's very educational. And then make your own decision about what you want to do after the fact. But I also encourage you to take this lesson about desire and the suffering attached to our desires and take it to other areas of your life. And see really what's happening with your desires. And that's not to say that desire is bad. Desire is a natural part of life. It's inescapable. I'm hungry right now as I'm talking to you. I have a desire to eat. And that desire to eat is causing me suffering, which is fine. It's not a big deal. I can't stop eating, but I can choose what I'm going to eat. I have a desire to sleep when I'm tired. But that desire to sleep can cause suffering if I have additional work I need to do instead. If I choose to sleep in instead of getting up in the morning to go work in the garden, well, that creates problems down the road. So regardless of what you think about the documentary, I'd encourage you again, look at your desires individually, one by one. Figure out what you want to do with it. Do I renounce it? Do I work with it skillfully? Or do I accept it? And then make your choice from there. So that's the talk for today. I hope it was helpful. I'd love to hear what you guys think about the documentary if you've already watched it. If not, I'd love to hear your thoughts about meat eating and Buddhism. Do you eat meat? I promise no one will be attacked either way. But I think it's an interesting discussion. Like I said, it's a question that goes back to the time of the Buddha. I don't think we'll solve it this evening, but I do like to chat. In addition to that, if you just have questions or comments about life in general, please type that in the comment section. I'll be sure to respond. And while we're waiting for those to come in, I'll make some announcements. So this is Dharma Sunday. It happens every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's a live stream where I tie Buddhist teachings to some real world event that's happening currently. We talk about movies, we talk about documentaries. Last week, we discussed the mindfulness movement and how that relates to Buddhist practice. On Wednesdays, we do meditation and sutra study, which is a bit more involved. That has a 15-minute guided meditation, followed by a reading from a sutra. Right now, we're reading from the Awakening of Faith Sutra. Then there's a Dharma talk, followed by a Q&A, like the one we're about to engage in. Again, live streamed every Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. at this channel. These teachings are offered free of charge, but if you would like to make a contribution, information for PayPal and CashApp are in the description for this talk. So, looks like we have some comments coming in. Great Hermit, good to see you, Great Hermit. You had a couple things to say. You said, "Good evening, Sensei." You then bowed. Thanks so much for that. And finally, it is difficult for me to be a vegan. I'm even struggling to be a vegetarian. Well, that's fair. That's fair. And I personally do not encourage people to go vegan immediately. If you decide to do that, I do think it's important to be vegetarian first. The reason for that is it is a very big life change for most people. It was for me. I grew up eating the standard American diet. So we ate fruits and vegetables. That was on the plate, but there was also a big chunk of cow or pig or fish, whatever. So there is a re-education that needs to happen before we can be plant-based. So I would just encourage you to be patient with yourself, give yourself time, and just ease into it over time. Read lots of books on nutrition, educate yourself, ensure that what you're eating is healthy. You don't want to be a junk food vegan or anything like that, and you're just eating Oreos and potato chips. So, but good on you for making that effort. I think it's a good one. Like I said, very much in keeping with the Mahayana teaching, but just be patient with yourself. Allison Griffin bowed. Allison, so wonderful to see you this evening. A pleasure as always. Divad Buddha X said, "I stopped eating meat back in August 2020. The only animal product I eat is honey with my oatmeal. I'm trying to replace it." That's very cool, Divad. Very cool. Honey is rough to replace. It's very tasty. It's hard to find something that isn't just syrup that they're calling honey. But yeah, good on you. Wonderful. Allison Griffin, this is helpful as I am planning to see the movie on Friday. Awesome. I would love to hear what you think about it, Allison. Like I said, I thought it was very well shot. If you like Cowspiracy, you'll probably like this as well. I believe the person who did Cowspiracy was a producer for Seaspiracy. It's probably why the name sounds similar. I thought it was great, so I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Michael Hill did the bow emoji. Thank you, Michael. So wonderful to have you here this evening. Great Hermit said, "I donated and bought your book, Sensei." Oh, wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Great Hermit. I appreciate that. My book, for those of you who don't know, is Perfectly Ordinary, Buddhist Teachings for Everyday Life. There's a link to a sample chapter of the book in the description if you'd like to read that. And it's available online, anywhere books are sold. Great Hermit, that's very generous of you. I appreciate that so much. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the book. Thank you. Thank you. Allison Griffin said, "Life is full of these ethical decisions that have no black and white." You also said, "I don't eat meat, but have fish about 4 times a year for the protein, and I raise chickens for the eggs." Yeah, Allison, it's interesting. And it goes back to the first noble truth, which says life is suffering. And that's just something I had to learn to accept in my own journey with food. Because like I said, I'm trying to find a way to eat that causes no suffering at all. And maybe it exists, but I just wasn't able to find it. Even in the way my vegetables are sourced, even in the way that, how they get to the supermarket and how I get them. And even if I grow them myself, what am I doing to the earthworms and the soil and the bacteria? So part of all of these trainings that we do, these processes, are accepting that fact, accepting the fact that suffering is an inescapable part of life, that there will always be some suffering involved in anything we do. I think this is what my teacher was telling me when he said, just do your best, right? This is what the Buddha was saying when he said that sometimes it's okay to eat meat and sometimes it's not okay to eat meat. He understood that it's impossible for us to make an all-encompassing choice that's perfect. And that for us to continue on this path, we have to allow ourselves to be imperfect, but we do the best we can. So, like I said, based on your life situation is going to decide what the most compassionate way for you to eat is going to be. And it seems like you're doing your best, Allison. You're making some pretty good decisions, so that's wonderful. What kind of chickens do you have? I'm interested. I'd like to know. I didn't realize there was more than one type of chicken. The farm I worked at when I was in Indiana and also when I was in New York, they both had chickens there. And then I learned that there's all these different types of breeds and they're raised for different reasons, and some are heirloom and some are new. So it's very interesting. Very interesting. Let's see. Great Hermit said, when you were training under other senseis, did they teach you how to make vegan dishes? There are a variety of vegan dishes at Buddhist temples. You also said, how do I practice being patient with someone who is unable to listen or be nice? Okay, so 2 questions there. I'll go to the first one. So there were no cooking lessons while I was training under various teachers. And it's interesting. So I had one teacher who was a strict vegetarian. I had one teacher who, ate meat and didn't think anything of it. I had another teacher. I'm not sure what his personal life was like, but I do know every time we did a retreat, all the food was vegan. And I think that's pretty common if you go to a Buddhist temple. Whatever you do in your own life is your business, but in the temple, again, trying to be as compassionate as possible, meals are going to be either vegetarian or vegan. So if you do a retreat, that's something you should expect. But yeah, no cooking lessons, nothing like that. But they did create lots of vegan and vegetarian meals for us during retreats that were delicious. You also asked, how do I practice being patient with someone who is unable to listen or be nice? Well, and you're going to get tired of me saying this, but I think it first goes back to the first noble truth. Life is suffering. And understanding that sometimes that suffering is people who are unable to be nice or to listen. So when I find myself in that situation, I just have to accept that, okay, this is the suffering I'm dealing with in this moment. How do I deal with this skillfully? And sometimes that's practicing acceptance. Just, you and I just aren't going to get along. We're just on 2 different wavelengths right now, and that's okay. Sometimes it's helpful to simply speak with them about our concerns. This conversation, I don't like the way it's going. I don't feel like we're listening to each other. And can we take this in another direction? And sometimes it's on us to change the way we're speaking with the person. Maybe they have a personality type. They prefer a more direct approach or a softer approach. So it can be hard. It can be hard when we're trying to be nice, we're trying to listen, and they're not giving us that back. My suggestion would be simply to practice acceptance and continue being nice, but not put yourself in a position where you can be harmed. So I'm thinking of a security guard at an apartment I used to live at. And every morning I would come in, I would see the security guard, I'd say hello, and he'd make a point of looking at me, make eye contact, so I know that he knows that I said hello, and then he would look away. which is more than a little rude, right? But I had to practice acceptance towards the fact that, okay, he just doesn't want to say hello to me, but I'm going to practice right speech and I'm going to say hello to him and be polite every time I see him. So I did that, and it took about 2 years until I was almost ready to move out of that apartment complex. But eventually he started to say hello back to me. No idea why he didn't at first, but after 2 years, he finally broke, so to speak, and we were able to be polite to each other. So that would be my recommendation. Continue doing your part, because in the end, we're only responsible for our own karma. If we take on the karma of everyone else in the world and every organization in the world, we're going to be very miserable people. That's something I had to learn, that I can't be responsible for the actions of the people that grow my food and the people that transport my food and the people that sell my food. The only responsibility I have is what food I'm choosing to eat. And that's it. I can't hold myself accountable for the actions of others. And if we look at Buddha, this is reflected in his teachings. If we look at how he and his monastics lived, that they were allowed to eat meat that was accepted, that was offered to them under certain circumstances, but they weren't allowed to kill the animal themselves. And it could not be killed for them. So there was an issue there of personal karma. That if they were the ones killing the animal, then their karma was damaged. But if the animal was already dead, then there's no karma associated with the food consumption at that point. So that's true of food consumption. That's also true of conversations. You're only responsible for what comes out of your mouth. So I've often walked away from conversations that didn't go well, feeling good, because I did my part. I was polite. I was reasonable. I was kind. Maybe they weren't kind to me, but I lived according to the Dharma. So I would just kind of change your mindset a little bit. Maybe instead of, I want this person to be nice to me, change it to, I want to be nice to them. Whatever happens after that happens, but I'm going to be nice. And then what that does, putting that focus on personal karma, we're less controlled emotionally by the actions of other people. Good question. Definitely something we all deal with. Allison Griffin said, there are so many chickens. I have bantam chickens, very small birds with eggs, a little smaller than a golf ball. You also said, yes, just doing our best. That's a good superhero name. Doing my best, Barbie. I like that. Very cool, Allison. Very cool. Genku. Hi, Sensei. Genku here. Good to stumble on you again. Genku. So good to see you, sir. Glad to have you here. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks for joining us this evening. Any other comments or questions before we end? Genku said gasho. Gasho. For those of you who don't know, gasho is, you primarily hear that word in Zen. It's a Japanese word. And what it refers to is when you put your hands together and bow. So I guess that's another form of the bow emoji. If you've ever received an email from me, I generally end with gasho, with bows of gratitude and respect. Great Hermit said, what is the hardest dish that you have to give up when you switch to a plant-based diet? Oh, that's interesting. That is a good question. What was the hardest to give up? Probably cheese. And not necessarily because I was just so infatuated with cheese. I mean, I like cheese. I didn't hate it. But it's just that in America, I didn't realize that cheese is put on everything. There's always cheese on the salad, on the pizza, on the I went to a dinner once where there was cheese on the spaghetti. And like the Parmesan cheese. So that was probably the most difficult to give up, was cheese, just because, like I said, it was everywhere. And that was one of the reasons earlier when you said you're struggling to be vegetarian. I said, just be patient, because we live in a society that makes it difficult to be plant-based, whether you're vegan or vegetarian. So yeah, I'm thinking about when I was in Portland, Oregon, that was the one exception to the rule. And because there was just plant-based food everywhere. You'd go into a steakhouse and they had like a vegan section of the menu. There was a burger restaurant. Of course, I can't think of the name right now. I think it was like Next Level Burger or something like that. And it was a burger shop, but it was all plant-based. The milkshakes, the burgers, the buns, everything plant-based. So that was very cool. But we live in a society that makes being plant-based difficult. So we need to be patient with ourselves if we decide to go that route. And we just need to do our best. Just like the Buddha said, just like my teachers told me all those years ago. Great Hermit said, Sensei, can you give out blessings? I absolutely can. Let's see. So this is a blessing that was offered to me many years ago. And I'll do it for you guys. It may be different than blessings you've heard before. It's been my experience that every temple does them slightly differently. But yeah, I will most certainly do a blessing. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. May all the power of the Buddha protect you. May all the power of the Dharma protect you. May all the power of the Sangha protect you. May all the power of the Devas and Bodhisattvas protect you and keep you from harm. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Okay. Allison Griffin said, that is really powerful advice, not to want a person to be nice to you, but that you want to be nice to that person. Thanks, Amitabha. Amitabha, wonderful. Yeah, I cannot remember who told me that, but it stuck. And it was really powerful because we spend so much time, again, going back to the second noble truth, suffering is caused by desire. I realized that so much of my own personal suffering was caused because I had a desire for people to act in a certain way. And I didn't realize it, but what I was trying to do was use my spiritual practice to make them act a certain way. Well, I'm just going to be so kind and so compassionate and so wise and loving that everyone else will be kind and compassionate and wise and loving to me. And that's just, frankly, not how it works. Sometimes we do the right thing, but if we learn to do the right thing simply because it's right and not because we have a desire for some special outcome, it becomes a lot easier. We practice the Dharma simply because we want to practice the Dharma. We're kind simply because we want to be kind. Great. Great Hermit said, thank you, Allison. Thank you, Allison. And you, Great Hermit. Allison Griffin did the bow emoji. Thanks so much. That's it. Any other questions, comments, concerns for this evening? Great Hermit said, Sensei, did you ever want to be a monk? Yes. I thought about that very deeply for a long time. And the reason I chose to not be a monk was I didn't feel like my reason for wanting to be a monk was the right one. Maybe this will change in a few years, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt like the reason I wanted to be a monk, the reason I wanted to live in a monastery was less because I wanted to practice the Dharma and more because I wanted to just get away from the world. I didn't like what was happening around me, and I was hoping that if I became a monk and lived in a monastery that I could escape it all somehow. And that's not a good reason to be a monk. It's not a good reason to do anything, frankly. So what I chose to do instead was to become a lay Buddhist minister and teach the Dharma, but still live here in the regular world. Because I felt my own personal karma, what I need in this life, isn't to live in a monastery, but to learn to live more skillfully in the everyday, so to speak. I also felt that in my role as a minister, I could be more effective if I was not in a monastery. This was a struggle I had sometimes when I was speaking with monks or nuns who were very deeply realized, who understood the teachings in ways that I never will, but just frankly could not relate to some of the struggles I had. So I'm struggling because I'm having trouble at work. But if you're a monk or a nun, you don't have a regular job. So that's not something that you can really sink your teeth into. Or maybe I'm struggling because I'm having family issues. And speaking with a monk or nun who, they've walked away from their family. That again was something that they struggled to relate to. So I felt that I'd be more effective in my role as a minister, not living in a monastery. And also, like I said, I felt that the reason I wanted to live in a monastery when I did, I'm very happy in my current life now, was less about wanting to practice the Dharma and more about wanting to simply, try and escape my problems. What Buddhism taught me was that running away is never the solution. We need to stand still or sit, as we do in Buddhism, and learn to work skillfully with whatever's there. Good question. Great Hermit said, are layman ministers only pertaining to Japanese Buddhist sects? I don't see ministers in other Buddhist sects. That's a good question. So, you don't see lay teachers very much in Theravada. In Vajrayana Buddhism, they do have lay teachers. So you'll speak to someone who's a lama, is the title they use instead of sensei. And oftentimes they've trained in a monastery, but eventually they leave the monastery and they live amongst the people. I would say it's primarily, you see it more in the Japanese Buddhist sects, which is where all of my training was done because, well, frankly, just because of practicality. There were some things that happened historically where Buddhists were being persecuted in Japan and they weren't allowed to be monks anymore. They were forced to eat meat. They were forced to take wives. I believe this was during the Meiji era. So for that reason, it just became the norm that you were a Buddhist priest or you were a Buddhist minister and you also had a job and you also had a family at the same time. There was also the issue of just not having the same community support that Buddhism had in other parts of the world. So when Buddhism came to Japan, Korea, China, some monks came and then left because they didn't think the Dharma could be practiced there because there wasn't that cultural expectation of giving alms to spiritual teachers like there was in India. So because of that, work practice, lay ministry, householder Buddhism all became more ingrained, I think, in the Japanese sects than you'll probably see in others. But they do have lay teachers in Vajrayana Buddhism as well. Great Hermit asked, do you feel that you can benefit people more if you are a Buddhist minister than a Buddhist monk? I personally feel like I can. I feel, just going back to my own experience, I felt like where I struggled was that the teachings often made more sense in the monastery than they did in everyday life. So I'm reading a book and I'm understanding the Dharma from a philosophical standpoint, but I'm not understanding, okay, how does this help me deal with my family on Thanksgiving? How does this help me stay calm in a traffic jam? How does this help me when I have to go to work at this job that I don't like, right? So I do feel that in my current role as a minister, as a lay minister, what I can do is I can talk about these real world events. I can talk about Seaspiracy. I can talk about the mindfulness movement because I'm right here in the thick of it. Genku said, Householders Zen, a valuable path, sensei. There's a cool podcast called Householders Zen. I think ancient Chinese Zen was imported lay people as characters in koans and as teachers too, I think. Yeah, I'll definitely check out that podcast, Genku. Thanks. That's cool. And I think you're right. It's interesting in Chan Buddhism. So one of my teachers, Venerable Shiying Fa, was a Chan Buddhist monk. And Chan Buddhism is very different from Japanese Zen. And this is going to come off wrong. And I'm going to explain afterwards, but it's more relaxed. And what I mean by it's more relaxed is that they're a lot more open to everyday life being the teaching. I think in Japanese Buddhism, sometimes we can get wrapped up in this sort of samurai Zen, as it's called sometimes. And we want to be separate and away from everyday life. But in Chan Buddhism, they're very much we'll figure it out. Very diligent practitioners, but very more open to change, I would say. Very open to that householder Zen. Yeah, very cool. Thanks, Genku. I'll definitely check out that podcast. Great Hermit said, how do I get involved with Japanese Buddhist sects? I feel like I resonate more with Japanese practices. Yeah, I honestly would just say, do a Google search in your area. I'm just type in Zen. I'm sure some will come up. If you're looking for some books to read by Japanese Buddhist teachers, and if other people have some ideas, I'd encourage you to put that in the chat. But one that I truly love is The Center Within. It was written by Reverend Gyome Kubose, who is my Dharma grandfather. Reverend Koyo Kubose, his son, was the person who authorized me to teach the Dharma. And The Center Within was cool because that was one of the first books I read that was very much into the householder Zen idea, where it wasn't this deep philosophical text. It was very much, this is how this works in everyday life. And it was very interesting, the genius of Reverend Gyome, because you didn't realize that he was teaching you Buddhism. It was just really good advice. It wasn't until I started doing deep training with the sutras, like we do on Wednesdays, that I realized, oh, that came from the Shurangama Sutra. Oh, that came from the Nirvana Sutra. Oh, that's straight from the Lotus Sutra. But he presents it in such a way that it's very, very real. She's not Japanese, but she was trained in a Japanese Buddhist sect. Charlotte Joko Beck is also very good. Her book, Everyday Zen, was instrumental to me. Once again, the idea of everyday life being the teaching. Even though she went through very rigorous training herself, she was very much focused on making Japanese Buddhism useful in our everyday existence. Who else? Brad Warner is another great teacher who does a good job of, this is real life and this is how Buddhism can help you. He was trained in Japan by Gudo Nishijima, and he's an ordained priest who, even though he's an ordained priest, he lives in California and has a sort of everyday life existence. He's the guiding teacher of, I believe it's called the Los Angeles Zen Center, if you want to check that out. But very deeply realized individual, for sure. Genku said, but you know that. Glad you are practicing in this way. Thank you. You also said, exactly, China also has a long bhikkhuni tradition in Zen, women in Zen, but here we are doing American Zen. Cool, no? Yes, very cool. I'm very interested to see what American Zen will look like. It's going to grow in various ways, and I'm very grateful. We should all be very grateful that we get to be part of this. That 50 years from now, 100 years from now, in the same way that we chant and offer gratitude to the individuals that kept the Dharma alive up to this point, one day people will be chanting and offering gratitude to us because we kept the Dharma alive for them. It's a very healthy, ongoing cycle. Chinese Zen, Japanese Zen, now American Zen. Used to be you had to climb a mountain or go into the forest to learn Buddhism. Now we can just look at YouTube. Dharma is amazing how it's changing. Genku said, also, where was that sensei? Followed by, please put that book title somewhere or say it again, please. Thanks. I'll just type all three of those book titles here. So there's The Center Within, Reverend Gilme Kubose. And then there's Everyday Zen. Back. And Brad Warner has a lot of books out. He's very prolific. I hope to be like him one day. I believe his most recent one is Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen. So I'll put that in here. All right, there you go. Any other comments or questions? One of the ideas I'm kind of toying with, Genku said, thanks, Sensei. Thanks, Genku. So one of the ideas I'm toying with, I would like to, just like we do a study of the sutras every Wednesday, maybe do some sort of book club where we do studies of American Buddhist authors as well. I think that would be really cool, but there's only so much time, right? So we'll stick with the sutras for now, and then maybe sometime in the future we'll add another day of practice where we go over American Buddhist authors and some of their texts as well, because I think there's some good things happening in the West currently. Great Hermit asks, have you been to Japan to study Zen? No, I have not. All of my training has been here in the United States. I've been very fortunate to find some very deeply realized teachers. Pope Link Rhodes at the Indianapolis Zen Center, Venerable Shi Ying Fa at Cloudwater Zendo, then also Reverend Gilme Kubose, who's the president of the Bright Dawn Center of Oneness Buddhism. I'd say those were my primary teachers. They're all here in the United States. I would like to visit Japan at some point. However, it's on my list. I actually was supposed to do that this year, or last year, I guess, 2020. I had the money saved up, the flight was booked, and then the pandemic happened. So I wasn't able to go. So hopefully I'll be able to do that sometime in the future. Genku asked, yes, Brad and Joko I know and love. Thanks for the Center Within book. Brad and Joko are truly fantastic. So yeah, glad I was able to point something new out to you. Wonderful. Michael Hill said, years ago, I practiced with Nichiren Shu Buddhist minister. He was a very kind, well-knowledged individual, or very well-knowledged human. Wonderful. So I have never practiced the Shirin-shu Buddhism myself. That sect of Buddhism has a strong focus on the Lotus Sutra. They chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. However, I have met some practitioners from Nichiren Shu and from SGI, and like you said, they were deeply realized, very kind, very knowledgeable individuals. So, very nice. Allison Griffin said, "May you get to Japan." Thank you, Allison. Buddha willing, one day. Let's see. Anything else? Have I talked you guys' ears off, or? All right. Well, looks like that's it for this evening. I hope to see you guys on Wednesday for meditation and sutra study. Oh, Great Hermit asked, can you speak Japanese? No, I cannot speak Japanese. That would be a useful skill. We're very fortunate. So I've talked to a lot of people about learning Japanese, whether they think that would be useful for the practice. It probably would be, but we're very fortunate in the West that a lot of the Japanese texts have been translated into English by people who are quite compassionate. So I don't speak Japanese. I would like to one day. And then it looks like you may have written something in Japanese, which is cool. I don't speak Japanese, like I said, but I'm glad you do. That's cool. You'll actually, because of that, you'll have a larger access. Some books haven't been translated yet. Oh, that says good evening. Oh, good evening. So learning Japanese, learning Chinese can be useful. Learning Pali can also be useful. I was a little bit disappointed a couple years ago. I was very intent on learning Sanskrit because I thought that would help me in my training. And it turns out there aren't a lot of original texts in Sanskrit that are left. So unless you're a philosopher or a philosophy teacher or a Buddhist studies professor, learning Sanskrit apparently isn't that useful. But learning other languages can certainly be helpful for the path. Great Hermit said, can a Buddhist practice Taoism? Absolutely. In fact, it's commonly said that Zen Buddhism arrived because it was a blending of Taoist teachings and traditional Indian Buddhist teachings. So if you read, especially Japanese Zen, if you read those texts, you'll find things that sound very Taoist in nature because there was a blending of those two traditions. So yeah, absolutely, a Buddhist can practice Taoism, or Taoism as it's sometimes called. Great. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Divad Buddha X said, if you want to learn more about Taoism, check out Derek Lin. And that's DERIK space LIN. Okay, I will check that out. I'm not familiar with that individual. However, I am always interested in learning more. The more I learn, the more I can assist you guys in your path. So awesome. I will check that out. Thank you for the suggestion, Deepad. Very kind. Great Hermit said thanks. Wonderful. Some interplay going on. Everyone learning from everyone. That's how the Sangha is supposed to be. Great Hermit said, I only know George Thompson. I don't know either of those people, so now that's another person I need to research. Great. All right, wonderful. Well, looks like that's it for this evening. look forward to speaking with you guys again. Amitabha.